On December 14, 1972, Eugene Cernan climbed back into the lunar module, looked out at the surface one last time, and left. Nobody has been back since. Not because we forgot how, not because we lost the technology, because of something far more human than that, and far more complicated. This is every reason no human has landed on the moon in over 50 years. Let's go.
Here is the truth. Nobody in the space community likes to say out loud, "We didn't go to the moon because we wanted to explore it. We went to the moon because we were terrified of the Soviet Union." The entire Apollo program, the most audacious engineering achievement in human history, the culmination of 400,000 people working across a decade, was fundamentally a military and geopolitical weapon. A demonstration, a statement to the world, and specifically to Moscow, that American technological capability was superior, that American systems worked, that American will could not be broken. On May 25, 1961, John F. Kennedy stood before Congress and committed the United States to landing a man on the moon before the end of the decade. Not because NASA asked him to, not because scientists had determined it was the logical next step in exploration, because 4 weeks earlier, the Soviet Union had put Yuri Gagarin in space, and the humiliation of that moment had shaken the American political establishment to its core. The Moon program was a response to embarrassment, and embarrassment, it turns out, is an extraordinarily powerful motivator. At its peak in 1966, NASA consumed 4.4% of the entire federal budget. 4.4%! Today, NASA receives approximately 0.4%, 10 times less. That peak funding was not driven by scientific curiosity or exploratory ambition. It was driven by fear. Fear of what it would mean for American global leadership if the Soviets got there first. And then, Apollo 11 landed. The goal was achieved. The flag was planted. The statement was made. And the urgency evaporated almost overnight. By the time Apollo 17 launched in December 1972, public viewership had collapsed. The first moon landing had drawn an estimated 600 million viewers worldwide, roughly 1/5 of the entire human population at the time. Apollo 17 barely registered in the public consciousness. People had moved on. The Vietnam War was consuming national attention and national resources. The economy was struggling. The political will to sustain an expensive space program, now that its primary geopolitical purpose had been served, simply no longer existed. Nixon's administration had already begun cutting Apollo missions in 1970. Apollo 18, 19, and 20, all planned, all prepared, all funded to various degrees, were canceled, not because they couldn't be done, because they no longer needed to be done. The race was over. America had won. And winning, it turned out, was the end of the program rather than the beginning of something larger.
Apollo didn't just cost money, it cost a staggering, almost incomprehensible amount of money. The total cost of the Apollo program from 1960 to 1973 is estimated at approximately $25.4 billion in 1973 dollars. Adjusted for inflation to today's values, that figure exceeds $280 billion. $250 billion, spent over 13 years to send 12 men to the moon. And that was during a period when NASA was receiving between 3 and 4% of the federal budget annually, a level of funding that has never been remotely approached since. When Nixon's administration made the decision to pivot from Apollo to the shuttle in 1972, it did so with a fundamentally different financial reality. The Vietnam War had consumed hundreds of billions of dollars. Domestic social programs were competing aggressively for federal resources. The public appetite for pouring money into space had collapsed along with public interest in the program itself. NASA's budget was cut, then cut again, then cut again. The shuttle was sold to Congress as the solution, a reusable vehicle that would dramatically reduce the cost of getting to space, making routine access to orbit cheap enough to justify. The pitch worked. Congress funded the shuttle, and in doing so, it redirected NASA's financial and institutional energy entirely toward low Earth orbit for the next 30 years. The shuttle was not cheap. It was never cheap. Each shuttle launch ultimately cost approximately $1.5 billion, but it was funded, it had momentum, it had a constituency, and it occupied NASA's budget so completely that there was no room for anything beyond Earth orbit. Every president who tried to revive lunar ambitions after Apollo ran into the same wall. George H.W. Bush announced the Space Exploration Initiative in 1989, a plan to return to the Moon and proceed to Mars. NASA's internal cost estimate came back at $500 billion over 20 to 30 years. Congress didn't even vote on it. It died immediately. George W. Bush announced the Vision for Space Exploration in 2004, a plan to return to the Moon by 2020. The Constellation program was born. It was immediately underfunded. It fell behind schedule. It accumulated cost overruns. When Obama took office in 2009, an independent review found that Constellation was effectively unachievable on its current budget without significant additional funding. Obama canceled it in 2010. The Artemis program, currently NASA's active lunar return effort, has a projected cost of $93 billion through 2025 alone. That figure has drawn sustained criticism from the Government Accountability Office and independent auditors who have repeatedly flagged cost overruns, schedule delays, and management inefficiencies. Money, always money. The Moon is 238,855 miles away. Getting there costs billions. Sustaining a program to get there repeatedly costs tens of billions. And in a political environment where NASA competes for funding against healthcare, defense, education, and infrastructure, the Moon is always the first thing cut when budgets tighten. We know how to get there. We just keep deciding there are other things to spend the money on.
Here is something that sounds like it should be the plot of a science fiction novel but is completely, documentably true. After Apollo, NASA destroyed the plans for the Saturn V rocket. Not metaphorically, not bureaucratically filed away in an inaccessible archive. The engineering drawings, the technical specifications, the manufacturing processes, the institutional knowledge required to rebuild the most powerful rocket ever successfully flown were dispersed, lost, or destroyed in the aftermath of the program's cancellation. The Saturn V remains the most powerful rocket ever to have carried humans to space. It stands 363 feet tall. It generated 7.6 million pounds of thrust at launch. It could lift 310,000 pounds to low Earth orbit and send 107,000 pounds toward the Moon. No rocket built since has matched its lunar payload capacity until NASA's new Space Launch System, which itself took over a decade and approximately $23 billion to develop. When Apollo ended, 3 complete Saturn V rockets sat unused. They were never flown. Today, they lie on their sides in museums, one at Kennedy Space Center, one at the Johnson Space Center, one at the U.S. Space and Rocket Center in Huntsville. Monuments to a capability humanity built, used, and then simply abandoned. The decision to retire the Saturn V without a successor was arguably the single most consequential mistake in the history of human spaceflight. It meant that when political will eventually returned for lunar exploration, under Bush in 1989, under Bush again in 2004, under Obama in 2010, despite the Constellation cancellation, under Trump in 2017, there was no vehicle to fly. The hardware was gone, the supply chains were gone, the engineering workforce that built it had retired or died. Starting over from scratch each time added decades and hundreds of billions of dollars to every subsequent lunar ambition. NASA spent the decades after Apollo without a rocket capable of going to the moon. The shuttle couldn't leave low Earth orbit. It was never designed to. Its entire operational envelope was a zone extending roughly 400 miles above Earth's surface, barely a rounding error on the 238,555-mile journey to the moon. For 30 years, from 1972 to the early development of Constellation in the mid-2000s, humanity had no vehicle and no credible near-term plan to build one that could carry humans to the moon. We didn't just stop going, we dismantled our ability to go, and then spent 50 years slowly, expensively rebuilding it.
The space shuttle was supposed to be the bridge to something greater. It became the destination. From 1981 to 2011, the space shuttle was NASA's primary focus, its primary budget line, its primary public identity, and its primary human spaceflight capability. 135 missions over 30 years, thousands of astronaut hours in low Earth orbit, the Hubble Space Telescope deployed and serviced, the International Space Station built piece by piece, remarkable science conducted in microgravity, and not a single mile beyond low Earth orbit. The shuttle's orbit ranged from approximately 190 to 400 miles above Earth. The moon is 238,855 miles away. The shuttle was not a vehicle for the moon and was never intended to be. It was a vehicle for low Earth orbit, a bus service to the space station and back, dressed in the aesthetic of something more ambitious than it actually was. The problem was not the shuttle itself. The shuttle was an extraordinary vehicle. The problem was that it consumed so much of NASA's budget, attention, and institutional identity that everything beyond low Earth orbit was effectively suspended for 3 decades. 2 shuttle disasters, Challenger in 1986 and Columbia in 2003, killed 14 astronauts and imposed years of stand-downs, reviews, and redesigns that consumed additional resources and attention. After Columbia, NASA spent approximately $1 billion per year just on shuttle safety improvements, safety spending that could not be used for lunar development. Resources redirected not toward the moon, but toward surviving the consequences of flying an aging, complex, expensive, and ultimately irreplaceable vehicle that the agency could not afford to lose, but could not afford to replace. The shuttle era was not a period of stagnation in space. It was a period of extraordinary achievement in low Earth orbit. But low Earth orbit is not the moon. And 30 years of institutional focus on 400 miles of altitude came at the direct expense of the 238,000 miles that lay beyond it. By the time the shuttle was retired in 2011, the engineers who had built Apollo were gone. The institutional memory of deep space operations had faded. The supply chains for lunar hardware no longer existed. NASA had to relearn, at enormous expense and over years, capabilities it had possessed in 1969. The shuttle gave us 30 years of science and cost us 50 years of the moon.
No human endeavor requiring decades of sustained effort can succeed without sustained political commitment. The moon has received anything but. Since Apollo ended in 1972, 5 separate presidents have announced plans to return humans to the moon or send them to Mars. Every single plan was either canceled, defunded, or radically restructured by a subsequent administration before it could reach fruition. Nixon pivoted to the shuttle, abandoning deep space entirely. Carter had no moon program. Reagan focused on the space station. George H.W. Bush announced the Exploration Initiative in 1989, Moon and Mars within 30 years, and watched it die in Congress within months. Bill Clinton had no moon program.
George W. Bush announced the vision for space exploration in 2004, back to the moon by 2020, then Mars, and created the Constellation program. Obama canceled Constellation in 2010 and redirected NASA toward an asteroid mission that never happened. Trump relaunched lunar ambitions under the Artemis banner in 2017, targeting a 2024 moon landing that was never achievable on the announced timeline. Biden continued Artemis, but the 2024 target slipped to 2025, then 2026, then 2027 for an actual landing. Each transition of power brought a new NASA administrator, a new set of priorities, a new budget proposal, and a new target date that reflected political ambition rather than engineering reality. The result has been catastrophic for continuity. Programs that require 10 to 15 years of sustained development to reach fruition have been repeatedly canceled after 5 to 7 years, far enough along to have spent billions, but not far enough to have produced flight hardware. The sunk costs of canceled programs are staggering. Constellation alone cost approximately $9 billion before cancellation, with nothing to show for it in operational hardware. The moon is not a political problem. It is an engineering and logistics problem. But it has been treated as a political problem, a deliverable to be announced at press conferences and canceled in budget negotiations for 50 years. And engineering problems cannot be solved on political timescales. The Apollo program succeeded in part because it had a fixed, non-negotiable deadline set by a president and maintained across 2 subsequent administrations. Kennedy set the goal. Johnson funded it. Nixon let it complete, barely. Every lunar program since has lacked that continuity. Every program since has been someone else's problem by the time the hard work was supposed to bear fruit. We have been 8 to 12 years away from the moon for 50 years.
Even setting aside the politics and the money and the lost hardware, the engineering problems of returning to the moon have proven far more difficult than expected. Case in point, the heat shield. When Artemis 1 returned from its uncrewed lunar mission in December 2022, engineers examining the Orion capsule's heat shield found something alarming. The ablative material, AveCoat, a substance designed to burn away in a controlled manner during re-entry, carrying heat away from the capsule and protecting the crew inside, had not behaved as predicted. Chunks of it had come off, not small amounts, significant chunks, larger than expected, detaching from the heat shield in an irregular pattern during re-entry. The thermoprotection system had not failed catastrophically. The capsule survived and would have survived with crew aboard, but the behavior was not what the models predicted, and unpredicted behavior in life-critical systems is unacceptable. This single issue delayed Artemis 2 by over 2 years. NASA spent those years conducting additional testing, running new thermal models, analyzing the root cause, and determining whether it was safe to fly crew on the existing heat shield design or whether a redesign was required. The analysis was contentious. Some engineers and outside experts maintained serious reservations throughout. Others concluded the additional data was sufficient to proceed. NASA ultimately decided to fly Artemis 2 with the existing heat shield design, a decision that itself generated significant controversy within the engineering community and was reviewed by NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman in January 2026 before being approved. Design changes addressing the root cause, AveCoat permeability, the characteristic that allowed unexpected gas flow and material loss, are planned for the Artemis 3 heat shield, the landing mission, the one that actually puts humans on the surface. This is the reality of returning to the moon after 50 years. The technology is not simply Apollo technology updated and improved. It is new technology, built by new contractors, tested against models that have proven imperfect, carrying crews whose lives depend on every system working exactly as predicted.
and the systems do not always work exactly as predicted. The heat shield problem did not kill Artemis, but it illustrated in concrete, expensive, years-consuming detail exactly why returning to the moon is harder than announcing a return to the moon. Here is where the current lunar return program gets genuinely precarious. Artemis 3, the mission planned to actually land humans on the moon, currently targeted for no earlier than 2027, is not going to use a traditional lunar lander developed and owned by NASA. It is going to use SpaceX's Starship. In April 2021, NASA awarded SpaceX a $2.9 billion contract to develop a human landing system variant of Starship, the largest and most powerful rocket ever built, to carry Artemis astronauts from lunar orbit to the surface and back. The decision was controversial. It was protested by Blue Origin and Dynetics, the competing bidders. The protests were ultimately unsuccessful, and SpaceX retained the contract. The problem is that Starship, as of the time of writing, has never landed humans anywhere. It has never operated in lunar orbit. The version required for the Artemis lunar landing requires orbital refueling, a technology that has never been demonstrated at the scale required, and a series of successful test flights that have themselves been subject to delays and anomalies. Starship's development has been extraordinary by private spaceflight standards. SpaceX has moved at a pace that no government program could match, conducting integrated flight tests at a cadence that reflected its build, test, fly, iterate philosophy. But extraordinary by private spaceflight standards is not the same as ready to carry humans to the lunar surface on a specific, congressionally mandated timeline. The dependency on a single commercial provider for the most critical element of the lunar landing, the vehicle that actually touches the surface, means that Artemis 3's timeline is hostage to Starship's development progress in a way that no NASA mission has ever been hostage to an external contractor before. If Starship is ready, Artemis 3 lands. If Starship isn't ready, if a test flight fails, if a certification milestone slips, if regulatory approval from the FAA is delayed, Artemis 3 doesn't land. There is no backup lander. There is no alternate vehicle. There is no Plan B. NASA has put all of its lunar landing eggs in one very large, very complex, and still being developed basket. The moon landing in 2027 is not just dependent on NASA, it is dependent on SpaceX delivering one of the most complex vehicles in spaceflight history on a schedule set years before the vehicle had completed its test program. That is either visionary or reckless, depending on your tolerance for risk. History will decide which.
You cannot walk on the moon in a standard spacesuit. The lunar surface is an environment of extremes, temperature swings of over 500 degrees Fahrenheit between sun and shadow, micrometeorite bombardment, abrasive regolith that destroyed Apollo suit joints and seals within hours of surface exposure, and radiation levels that require substantial shielding. Walking on the moon requires a suit specifically engineered for the lunar surface, not a suit designed for the International Space Station or a suit designed for launch and re-entry. NASA's Apollo spacesuits, the ones that worked on the moon, were designed and built in the 1960s. The companies that built them, the engineers who designed them, the manufacturing processes that produced them, all gone. Building new lunar spacesuits from scratch took years longer than expected and cost far more than budgeted. NASA initially contracted Axiom Space to develop new Artemis lunar spacesuits, the AXMU, or Axiom Extravehicular Mobility Unit. The development timeline slipped, the costs increased. As recently as 2023,
The Government Accountability Office identified spacesuit development as one of the critical path items most likely to delay a lunar landing. The suits are being developed, progress is being made, but the lesson from spacesuit development is the same lesson from every other component of the lunar return. Things that seem straightforward when announced take longer and cost more than the announcement suggested. You cannot put humans on the moon in suits that don't exist yet, and for years, the suits didn't exist yet.
For the first time since 1969, there is genuine urgency pushing the lunar program forward. Not the urgency of scientific discovery, not the urgency of exploratory ambition, the same urgency that built Apollo in the first place: competition. China has an active, funded, government-backed human lunar program. The Chinese Lunar Exploration Program, known as the Chang'e program, has successfully landed robotic missions on the moon, including the far side, and has explicitly stated the goal of landing Chinese astronauts on the moon by 2030. China has been methodical, patient, and consistent in its space program in a way that NASA's lunar efforts have not been. It has not canceled programs mid-development. It has not changed direction with each change of leadership. It has followed a long-term plan with the kind of political continuity that democratic systems struggle to maintain. The Artemis Accords, a framework for international cooperation in lunar exploration, championed by the United States and signed by dozens of partner nations, are in part a direct geopolitical response to Chinese lunar ambitions. The race is not just to land humans on the moon. It is to establish the legal, logistical, and physical framework for long-term lunar presence, including access to lunar water ice at the South Pole, which is potentially the most valuable resource in the inner solar system. Water ice can be broken into hydrogen and oxygen, rocket propellant. A nation that controls the South Pole's water ice resources controls the gas stations of the cislunar economy. This competition is providing the political urgency that has been missing from American lunar policy for 50 years. Congressional support for Artemis, while never unconditional, has been more sustained than support for any previous post-Apollo lunar initiative. The threat of Chinese boots on the moon before American boots return has a focusing effect on political attention that no amount of scientific argument has managed to produce. Artemis II has just completed. 4 astronauts flew around the moon and returned safely to Earth for the first time in 54 years. The hardware works. The trajectory works. The crew survived deep space. The next step is the landing. But even now, even with renewed urgency, functioning hardware, a commercial lander in development, and geopolitical stakes higher than they've been since Apollo, the landing is still years away, still dependent on Starship certification, still dependent on sustained funding, still dependent on political continuity through at least one more presidential transition. The reasons that kept us off the moon for 50 years have not disappeared. They have simply been joined by a new reason to overcome them. 9 reasons. 9 completely different forces: political, financial, technological, institutional, and geopolitical, all converging on the same outcome for 54 years. The Cold War ended and took the urgency with it. The money dried up faster than the ambition. We retired the most powerful rocket ever built and didn't replace it for half a century. The shuttle consumed everything for 30 years. Political whiplash canceled every program before it could finish. A heat shield didn't behave as predicted and cost 2 years. The landing vehicle is a rocket that has never landed humans anywhere. The suits took years longer than promised, and the only thing that might finally get us back is the same thing that got us there the first time: fear of someone else getting there first.
On December 14, 1972, Gene Cernan climbed that ladder, looked back at the surface, and said he believed humanity would return soon. He was right about the belief. He was wrong about the soon. Artemis 3 is targeting 2027. The hardware is closer than it has ever been. The urgency is real. The window is open. But 54 years of reasons don't disappear because the schedule says 2027. We'll see. Subscribe. This story isn't over.